Hello, and welcome to another episode of Editor Social with Cinemaazi Studios. One of the indelible memories of growing up in the mid-1980s is that of a free and fearless news media that spoke truth to power, and New Delhi Times brought that alive with its spot-on portrayal of media and politics like no other mainstream Hindi film of the era. Today, as media, barring a few exceptions, has all but caved in and become a mouthpiece of people in power, it is instructive to look back on New Delhi Times and see how far the country, its politics and media have travelled in these 30 years.
बुरा न मानो तो एक बात कह दूं, सोच के देखो, भले राम का खून अजय सिंह ने नहीं त्रिवेदी ने करवाया है तो कहां फर्क पड़ जाएगा। ये दोनों एक ही सिस्टम के दो चेहरे हैं। कभी कभी सोचकर डर सा लगने लगता है कि हम प्रोफेशनल जर्नलिस्ट्स अपनी स्टोरी कवरेज में, फोटो कवरेज में इतने खो जाते हैं कि जो रियल ट्रेजेडी है उसे बाईपास कर जाते हैं, भूल जाते हैं, महसूस तक नहीं करते। महसूस करते थे जब कभी कभी होता था।
राजनीति जैसे उलझे हुए ताने बाने से कहानी का एक सिरा निकालना बहुत मुश्किल काम है, लेकिन इन सिरों को ढूंढना या ढूंढते रहना बहैसियत जर्नलिस्ट मैं अपना फर्ज समझता हूँ।
And today, we're privileged to have with us Mr. Ramesh Sharma, most well known for his film New Delhi Times. Since this is focused on New Delhi Times, and one of the first things that comes to mind is 33 years have gone by, and this film hasn't had a theatrical release. It, I think, got a screening in Gulzar before it got mired in censorship problems.
No, I think that's slightly your memory, because it's 33 years. Your memory is slightly, sort of, what should I say, weak on this. The film was released theatrically.
Okay.
In fact, it got mired in Doordarshan, and Doordarshan stopped the, banned the film.
Okay.
That's what happened. They'd announced a screening of the film.
Yeah.
And the night before it was being screened, they banned it.
So, despite all of that, 33 years have gone by, and the film still resonates with a whole new generation of filmmakers, film enthusiasts, viewers. Why do you think it's that, at that point of time, after all that,
I think, as they say, the French saying, the more things change, the more they remain the same. Mm-hmm. The film, as you know, was one of India's first political thrillers, at least in mainstream cinema.
Yes.
In the sense that it had mainstream actors. I mean, the storyline and the treatment of the film was still what was then very popularly known as parallel cinema.
And very different.
It was like offbeat kind of a thing. But what made it, I think, powerful was, and what made it relevant was, that for the first time it spoke with honesty and a certain amount of transparency about the socio-economic, political nexus with media and politics, and about how politicians were actually behind riots. I mean, today we see that all the time on television.
Yes.
So when people see that, they realize that things have not changed at all.
Yeah.
And when you see how media is being used by politicians, by businessmen, to essentially plant stories, essentially put up their point of view, essentially buy out the media's credibility, this film therefore becomes relevant again. Yeah. So the storyline of that film almost seems eternal.
Yes.
And I think that is what it is. It was made in a style which today probably may be a little dated. Okay. It probably would be, one might even say that it is, its storytelling narrative style was, it doesn't have the speed with which you associate current filmmaking, genres. Yeah. But the thematic quality of the film.
It was very prescient in that
sense. It was a film ahead of its time. you know, and that is what I think is why to this day people still remember the film. Because of course, it was bold,
Yeah.
you know, for that period. Nobody had dared talk about a chief minister or a minister or people getting involved in murders and thing. And then you having editors who were trying to fight for truth.
Yeah.
And then you were having, you know, the owners who were trying to suppress the truth.
Yeah.
At least another generation of owners.
Yeah.
You know. So there were many people who were kind of looked at it in some sense of the idealism of what cinema could be.
Yeah.
It was also one of the first few films where you saw the working of a newspaper from inside the newsroom.
Yeah, it's one of those rare films of that time at least, and even now, which has a very true to life portrayal of the editorial room. Yeah.
So all that is what I think gave the film a resonance and a certain amount of what I would say shelf life. You know.
So this was the first time you were attempting to make a feature film. We're talking of the mid-80s, which are considered in terms of mainstream Hindi cinema the worst decade we've had. You know, many people have said that. What inspired you to sort of what was the starting point? You know, like if I have to ask, what kicked off the idea and what gave you the gumption to make it songless?
I must confess that, you know, I was a documentary filmmaker. My very first film had won the National Award, and I'd gone in ahead and then made a film in USA for PBS, again on Tibetan Buddhism. But I was very much a political child. I was very much involved in the, you know, the media scene as it was at that time. And the media scene of the 1980s was very depressing. There were riots almost every day. There were killings that was almost every day. You know, Mrs. Gandhi had just come out of emergency in 78, 1980, she had returned to power. And there was what you might say a liberation of the press that had taken place. Because of the emergency, you saw people like M.J. Akbar writing in Sunday. You saw people like Arun Shourie writing for Indian Express. You saw many in the Hindu, N. Ram writing about, you know, various causes that were there. There was almost like a breath of fresh air in the media. You know, it was almost like investigative media was becoming the conscience of the country. And when you read all that and you begin to think, you begin to realize that nobody has really told the truth about this country. That cinema has been so escapist that nobody has really tried to, or at least there have been people like Dev Benegal who tried it, you know, in Kali Yuga and all that. But everybody was, Govind Nilani tried it, you know, with his films. But they were all, again, as I said, there were many others. The country is so huge. And I must confess that I was one of those people who was blessed with a kind of a serendipity. This film happened purely by serendipity. And I have a lot of people that I can sort of, I should give credit to for making this. And one of the first was Subrata Mitra. Subrata had worked with me on Room Tech, you know, and he'd enjoyed working with me, you know, and I admired his work. He was perhaps the greatest cameraman that was there. But Subrata also, when I told him the story I had in mind, he said, this would make a very good film. So who do you have in mind? I said, listen, the producer that I have wants star cast. So he said, okay, let me talk to somebody I know in Bombay. He didn't tell me the name first. And then he said, okay, I've spoken to Shashi Kapoor. If you think he's right, you go ahead and, you know, talk to him. So I flew to Bombay. I met Shashi Kapoor. He took me out for dinner at the Golden Dragon in the Taj. And I still remember it was Jummah Day, Friday. I didn't know at that time what Jummah Day was. It was so important for filmmakers. I mean, it was a very secular industry, you know. So he asked me, Shashi asked me the storyline. I told him. He was very impressed with it, you know, the storyline. So he says, he asked me for 100 rupees. So I thought he was asking me to pay for the food bill, you know. I got a little worried for a while. And then he says, no, this is my signing amount. I've accepted your film.
Wow.
It was as simple as that, you know. And then I had another friend who said, listen, you need to have some good writer working on it. The storyline is good, but why don't we go and meet Gulzar? So I went and met Gulzar blind, cold. I didn't know him from anybody. I just went and told him the story. And I said, I'm making this film. This is my first film. would you like to write it? He heard me out and he said, yes, it's fantastic, let me work on it. And he, both of us had lots of sittings. Then I came back to Delhi and he wrote the script, there were some lines that I wrote in English and he translated it. Rather, he improved on it, brought a lot more poetry to it. And, and some lines which he gave me as what I would say, contributing to both the gravitas and the density of the film. Yeah. And then we decided, okay, let's go. And then when I had Shashi Kapoor, I decided I needed a woman who would match his age and that same stature, And so somebody said, why don't we take Sharmila? So I went, Gulzar then helped me get Sharmila.
Okay.
He introduced me to. Okay. So, so therefore I owe a lot of people what I would say, the making of this film. It wasn't that I had the idea to make the film, but without these people, and then I come to Delhi. We are about to start the filming. Om Puri by then had joined the film. Everybody had joined. We had taken up a guest house in Gulzar Park, which belonged to Times of India, as a cruise, the whole crew members were staying in that. It had about 25 rooms there. And I get a call that night, the next day is a shooting, or the two days later, and I get a call from London. And Shashi Kapoor is there on the line and he says, my wife is dying, I cannot come.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought to myself, it's like the world is kind of sung. And he said, get somebody else. So I said, no, Shashi, I've written it for you. I can't think of anybody else, I just cannot. He says, no, get Anupam Kher, get Nesruddin. He rattled off the usual suspects that I can get, And then I said, I can't get them and then have Sharmila. He said, no, then get Shabana or get somebody, the usual thing. Yeah. I said, no, Shashi, I'll wait. I'll either not make the film, but if I make it, I will only do it with you. And 2 days later, Jennifer passed away. So he came back, so I let him get over his grief. And then he called me himself and he says, I'm ready to shoot if you are ready. I feel very guilty that, But I said, no, without you, I wouldn't have anywhere made the film. So we began the filming shooting and then, it went on.
And there was, at no time, was there a pressure from him as a producer or any other, because you talk about distribution also and all of that, to sort of make it a more commercial prospect in terms of songs?
Shashi never interfered in one bit of it. Yes. If at all, he talked about would be maybe a dialogue here and there where he felt uncomfortable to, mouth it in that sense. He would felt easier if some words were changed. But beyond that, there was not a single interference.
And you had no doubts in your mind about making a songless film in an era which is notorious for
I felt that this had to be a political thriller. It had to have that. Otherwise, I would be compromising it, and that whole storyline would get diluted. I know that my producer was P.K. Tiwari. He was, I must salute him. He was sort of kind of supporting me throughout. His only condition was, मुझे 2 stars चाहिए film में. I had given him those 2 stars.
That's interesting.
Otherwise, there was nothing. I mean, nobody interfered. I have been blessed with every film that I have made.
Yeah.
That my condition for making a film is, I will make it my way. I will like to have the last word in the editing. Otherwise, I wouldn't be. And I also had a fantastic editor. Yeah. Renu Saluja.
Renu Saluja, of course.
And she was editing, wonderful editor. Absolutely incredible. We were editor in Rajkumar Studios, Vishadaram's. We were editing there. And absolutely fantastic. She was hugely supportive, and none of these guys got paid.
Yeah, that's what I was coming to. Like, these are all huge names.
At that time, they were big names, and Shashi Kapoor, he asked me, how much can you afford? I said, I can afford you nothing. But since you want something, you tell me, and he agreed to do the film for 1 lakh rupees. Okay. And and he said, okay, if the film makes profit, you give me 10% of it. Okay. Well, the film never made profit, so that was different, But
Gulzar also
same,
came on
they
board.
all came with, 50,000. I mean, none of them, this whole film was made for 35 lakhs.
Okay.
I mean, of course, those days 35 lakhs was a little more expensive for a serious cinema. But even then, it was far less than what the commercial films that these stars would have cost. And his only condition, Shashi's, was that when I was shooting in Delhi, I kept everybody in the guest house. Sharmila had her own house, so here there was no problem. So his only condition was that please put me up at Taj. I give you one promise. I will not use any liquor there. I will not put any food bill. I will not put any telephone bill, because stars were notorious for going into a hotel and sort of giving bills that would give a heart attack to the producers. And true to his word, he says, if I stay in that your guest house, people will say Shashi has become broke. And my whole my image will come down. So please, just for that. So I put him up in Taj, here, Mansingh. Otherwise, it was absolutely fantastic.
The film has one of the most, in fact, probably the most authentic representation of two aspects which we regularly get wrong in our cinema. Media, how a newspaper functions, and politics, which is either sort of extolled as very virtuous or vilified as so. But this how did you manage? What was the research that went into creating that? Could you just elaborate? Like one of the things about the media that caught my attention when watching it last year at Habitat when you screened it, is the comment that the journalist makes. मैं तो यहाँ था मजा आ गया riot हो गया and it's a riot में तुमको मजा आता है it's a very very telling statement and the way you've gone into the newspaper room and how they print
the amazing thing is that before I began the film I went into every one of these newspaper rooms to see how they work. Unfortunately I had friends, I went to each one of them, and if you notice in the film there were 3 different newspapers used.
Absolutely.
I had the main the newsroom, which we didn't want to do it as a set, so we had Times of India, okay, and the printing press, where the whole thing with the plates and all, which of course is not used now any longer, was Indian Express. And the final thing that you see the papers coming out in the top, that being printed was Hindustan Times. So all 3 of them allowed me, because I knew that I wouldn't be able to take that much time from each one of them, because after all they have to bring out papers every day and there is no holiday for a newspaper, So all 3 of them were used. As far as politics was concerned, well, I had, I wouldn't say I have political friends, but I read a lot. I read a lot of, what was happening, all the great, sort of investigative stories that were coming, and one absorbs them. And then of course, Gulzar was there to help me out, flesh these characters, give them a certain kind of, a certain mood. And very honestly, there's a combination of all these characters that is there. I mean, for instance, a lot of people say the old man, he reminds me of Ramnath Goenka.
I was going to come to that. Is the newspaper editor and the owner?
Yes, there is Arun Shourie there, but there's also N.G. Akbar. There were, many other, editors who were those days what you might call it, investigative, with a certain amount of idealism, who wanted to crack stories, wanted to clean up things. I mean, like Arun Shourie once told me, I remember for an interview I did with him for another political documentary, and he said sunlight is the best disinfectant. So there are many lines of that which were translated into Hindi as a dialogue in the film.
Did you speak, which editors did you speak to get a sense?
I didn't read any of the editors, but I used to read a lot. So, so therefore they became my inspiration in that sense. It was a composite thing. So therefore by composing it, I was creating an ideal man. And because my producer came from Ghaziabad, I had to make this man from Ghaziabad because he just wanted it for the sake of things. So therefore, Vikas Pandey, who's Shashi Kapoor, his hometown is Ghaziabad. His father is a freedom fighter, which becomes normal. That era, the freedom fighters were still alive. There was a certain amount of idealism that they worked for, and they were being extremely disappointed with the politics that the way the country was turning. And as like the last lines of the film, if you remember, the last monologue that takes place, he says that years from now, these people would not even be mentioned in the footnotes of history. But the turn that they would have given the country would be irreversible.
And it's
That is what I'm saying. That is exactly, and I believe that today even. If I were to make this film today, I would probably use the same words. Because there are petty men today who are in politics today. There are pettier men today who are in media today. In fact, media has become even worse. Far, heavily compromised. Compromised to the point that somebody today who absolutely believes in this country will find a dystopian, entirely dysfunctional society, partly responsible from the way the media has lost its moral compass, partly responsible because of the way social media has completely abused itself as a platform, and partly responsible because there is no firewall between owners and the media, the newsroom. You know, I mean, in that film, if you remember New Delhi Times, there's this conversation between Gulzar Kharbanda and Shashi Kapoor, where he says that you should try and do this, and he says, you don't have any right to tell me what to do.
And you have the character of Manoj Singh also who stands by that old
way of
credo.
You know, and very strangely, part of it also came from books I was reading.
Like
for instance, Harold Evans. Okay. I mean, if you read his Good Times, Bad Times, Harold Evans was one of the greatest editors in the world. Okay. He edited the Sunday Times. He edited London Times, and his owner was Rupert Murdoch.
Oh, it doesn't get any.
And he writes in that book about his battle with Rupert Murdoch. You know, and how it went on. That remained in the back of my head as some kind of a, you know, the way the newsroom functions. I mean, if you ever read, I keep telling all youngsters today who are in newsrooms and who are editors and all that, there are 2 books of Harold Evans that should be a mandatory reading for all people who are doing news. I mean, hard news. One is Good Times, Bad Times, and the other is called My Paper Chase, which is his biography, which is how a newsroom should be run. What is the definition of a good editor? You know, of an ideal editor. A man who looks for the truth with absolutely no fear, who speaks truth to power with the moral authority of somebody who can say it's my way or the highway. You know, and it's incredible, that kind of idealism, and it comes true. So when you have that, I think it remains, as you answer your first question, it makes it relevant for years to come.
You know, the making of the film, well, and we'll talk about your collaborations with some of these stalwarts you had behind the camera and in front. But the making of the film, tough as it might have been for a first-time filmmaker, taking a huge leap of faith with the genre and all of that. But after the making, what the film ran into, you know, and I stand corrected on the film not getting a theatrical release, but then what was it that created that whole...
Well, I think if you realize that period of time, Ayodhya was just coming up. Okay? Ayodhya's doors had just been opened. There were riots that were taking place in UP. And somehow at that time, the Doordarshan Director General, Harish Khanna, he panicked because there were riots in my film. And in the riots in my film, I blame the politicians for it. You know, the father says, you know, that these are not riots. These are just, they're, you know, sort of all these people, they're fighting their battle. You know, what's happening. And so he panicked and he banned the film. In the banning of that film, he actually helped, because there is nothing greater for a filmmaker than to be banned. You know, as they say in America, you know, you're banned in Boston, you're made for life. You know, and this film probably would still have made some money, I don't know. But the banning of it gave it a huge amount of news coverage in the front pages of every newspaper, you know, in magazines. We became the front page sort of a thing, you know, and therefore that helped. But then what happened was, and this is the irony of it, you know, that film was released in 2 of the biggest halls. Okay, Chanakya at that time,
Yeah,
which is a
yeah.
very big hall.
Yeah.
And Regal, not Regal, sorry, Odeon.
Okay.
Okay, now Odeon has a capacity of 1200. But those days, there were no multiplexes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you had a kind of a deal with the owner that if your footfalls, your viewership was below 800, they would take the film off. So for 1200 hall, they needed 800. Now, I had 700 in the third week.
Okay.
But the film had to be taken off. Now, imagine if there was a multiplex, it would have gone on for a, for a long period of time. The same thing with Chanakya. Chanakya at 1200. You know, so though it went on, I mean, they had enough people, they couldn't continue with it. And then I had another problem. And this came like one of the jokes that, kind of a stupid jokes that can happen to, I mean, if I say it out today, it sounds almost surreal. I've been called to Calcutta because they want to screen this film in London. And Buddhadev Bhattacharya was then the information minister, Jyoti Basu's government. And they want to honor me. So I fly to Calcutta. I reach Calcutta, I reach London, and I'm told the film cannot be screened because some idiot lawyer has gone to a sessions court and taken a stay on the film to say there is a scene in my film where Sharmila Tagore is a lawyer and Shashi is the thing, and he says that he tells her that all lawyers are liars. That one line was used.
Yeah, I still remember that.
Suo moto, the judge gave the thing.
Okay.
So because of that, the film had to be stopped in Chanakya because it couldn't be shown. Couldn't be shown in London. I came back here, took an urgent appeal to the High Court. The High Court judge saw the film with me in Films Division Auditorium, and he gave a stricture to that sessions court. He unbanned the film, fined that chap petitioner 20,000 rupees or 30,000 rupees, whatever amount it was. But it was too late. And by that time, the second thing that was happening was, that was the era of piracy.
Yes.
So half the people who were watching the film, more than half, almost everybody I knew had watched the film on VCR, pirated VCRs.
Regarding your collaboration, you've just given brief introductions to Gulzar Sahab and Renu Saluja. So, Dev Benegal was production designer on the.
He was not a production; he was a sound designer.
Sound designer of the production of the film.
And I didn't pay him. This day he kind of tells me, you owe me money.
So could you just, and we'll come to with Subrata Mitra. I have a longer narrative that I'll have with you. But with Renu Saluja and Gulzar Sahab and of course Sharmila Tagore, it was a small role but a pivotal role in terms of being a sort of compass even to Shashi Kapoor's character. So just could you just elaborate on some of these aspects of the collaboration, some memory that leaves out?
I must confess that they were all very indulgent towards me.
Okay.
Primarily, I think they were indulgent because they felt I knew the subject better than them.
Okay.
And that I must give them credit for. Never did Gulzar ever think that he knew politics better than me or knew media better than me. And he always told me that, he says, I learned more about politics making this film than I ever knew. He says, I knew a lot of politicians, but I never knew that in depth of politics, which I learned from working on your script, And the second thing which I think with Gulzar's was fantastic was the only thing where we had disagreement. He didn't believe in a narrated film.
Okay.
That is my style.
Okay.
I come from the documentary background.
The voiceover that narrates the...
And that was Shashi Kapoor's words.
Yeah.
Right at the beginning I say, I had to convince him.
Yeah.
He was, he was always telling me, nahi karo, I said, no, I have to give a context, I have to make an editorial statement. And the editorial statement to me are these great monuments, They also represent some era when people ruled this country. And then you had today's rulers, and like them, they will also become just monuments. So, I mean, this was perhaps the only one we might say a little bit of disagreement. And probably this film has less narration because of that. I would have preferred many more editorial statements being made by Shashi Kapoor because I felt it was necessary to bring that context for the viewer. But he didn't believe in it. So at the end, I put in a lot.
Yeah, exactly.
The film ends with that,
And Renu Saluja, like we've heard so much about her, how she...
I mean, in fact, she felt that when I was doing the riot scenes,
Yeah,
I
exactly.
had shot too little because I didn't have the money to it.
Okay.
But she made something out of it,
Yeah.
you know, and that was the
And the riot scenes are really...
Yeah, exactly.
They are so disturbing in the content, in the way they are shot also sort of...
And in fact, that was Renu Saluja to a great extent. You know, the editing that takes place there, the way it was done. I know today that the whole stills that I used become a little, now it is a little, you know, what I would say, not sort of dated,
Okay.
you know, that style.
Yeah.
But at that time it worked, you know. I mean, it was remember that, you know, we were not so sophisticated in our storytelling those days.
Yeah. And then technology hadn't reached.
Yeah, absolutely. We
Yeah.
were still doing, we had to, in fact, because of Subrata only, I could get Eastman color for printing it. Otherwise, everybody was using Fuji. You know, there was a limit to it which you could get.
Okay.
There was a limit to buying of stock footage. I mean, people don't know these things.
Yeah, exactly. You know, like this is...
Today, everybody takes it for granted. But, you know, there was a period where even stock footage had to be, there was a quota for it, for filmmakers.
Okay. So now that you mentioned Subrata Mitra, and this is something that is very close to my heart also, this is a legend who begins his career. His first film is Satyajit Ray's first film. He
And the
makes
still photography begins first. Before even
with
that.
genre was Reva. And then his first film, he had never seen a Michel camera before that. And your first film is his last film.
Yes.
There's an extraordinary sort of resonance to that. And you have spoken to me earlier about your association with people talk about him as a very difficult man to handle and a very temperamental man. So I would like something from you about working with
Well,
this great...
I'll tell you one thing. If there was any man I learned cinema from,
Yeah.
and I'm using the word cinema in the purest sense, it was with Subrata.
Okay.
He was a cinematic cameraman. He was a cameraman who was basically absolutely cinematic. He was a technician par excellence. He could take out a Ariflex camera and put it back together.
Oh, really?
You know, I mean, that was the kind of thing to it, because he wanted to know how it worked and how could it be improved. We had no money, you know, and he used the primitive little wooden boxes with tissue papers to create certain kind of bounce lighting. He used certain, you know, with the set designer, those Japanese lantern balls to create a certain, you know, softness on the face of Shashi and Sharmila. You know, this was the man who, and he talked about, he was incredible about what we call creating a certain suspense and revelation through the use of zoom and movements. There's no greater cameraman than that, you know, and his use of what I call the simulation of lighting, you know, he was perfect. Now, because of his perfection and his obsession with perfection, he was seen to be a difficult man, because 99% of the time in commercial cinema, people don't have time to do it. You know, the actor, he's got about 5 other films he has to go to. Now, he cannot keep on waiting for the lighting to take place for one shot or one scene. You know, but fortunately, Subrata had worked before with both Sharmila and with Shashi. So they knew that this man was a perfectionist, and that the end result would actually be, you know, tremendous for them. So they helped, that helped me. Now suppose I had a new star, I might have had problems.
Yeah. Okay.
But with them, I didn't. Now the second thing with Subrata was that we worked collaboratively together, because I knew what I wanted. You know, so I used to storyboard it for him.
Okay.
You know, and he would sometimes change it, sometimes help me. It was a collaboration. And like all cinema, I keep telling everybody, cinema is the most collaborative filmmaking artistic effort. Nobody who tells, anybody says that I make film myself, I think either he's a, you know, a egomaniac, or maybe he's a freak of nature.
Okay.
Because generally, you have to have, or even Ingmar Bergman had Zygmunt and, you know, Wilmer Zygmunt and Sven Nykvist as his cameraman, you know.
Yeah.
And editors and his actors and, you know, Liv Ullmann and B.B. Anderson and all that. You know, you go to every filmmaker They have their favorites. I mean, Martin Scorsese does not do any film without Thelma Shoemaker as his editor, you know. So there is a certain thing that you bring. You have to have incredible talent pool that helps you in every department. And Subrata was par excellence in that, in his work.
And this is not the only film you worked together on, as you say.
I worked with him in Roomtech before,
Yeah.
you know, which is a small documentary.
Yeah.
But he made it into a magical, you know, experience for me.
Okay.
And I began to learn cinema in that sense, you know, how it was to be done, how it's to be shot, and you know what kind of a thing that I used to have. And again, that film was with a budget of 2.5 lakhs of rupees, you know, and shooting in Sikkim, taking it all from Calcutta, all the equipment. We were shooting in 35 millimeters, a documentary, you know, and going to Bombay. And he was such a perfectionist. Those days, no computers, no digital, you know, DIs and all that.
Yeah.
You had to do frame by frame.
Yeah.
And he used to sit together with that color grader
Okay.
himself,
Please,
you know, and he used to put those colors, each filters, to get the right thing. And then he would want to know. He knew that most Indian projection halls had very poor bulbs. They wouldn't have full, you know, the capacity for their bulbs. So he would make different quality of things for different cinema halls. You know, I mean, that is the details into which he went. Because he knew that he needed a darker, you know, if he made too dark a thing, people in a smaller hall would not be, in small town would not be able to see anything. Because the bulbs don't have the capacity. And if you did it, if you had it in a good hall, the same print, it would be overlit.
Yeah,
you
exactly.
know. So that amount of detailing that we went into, you know, that was incredible. And that, of course, is what his reputation was. That, oh, he was a difficult man. I think I've told many times the story. I was in USA, in UCLA. I had gone to show New Delhi Times. And standing in the, you know, in the lobby was Neste Alvandros, the great cameraman who won the Oscar for Kramer versus Kramer, who shot all of Truffaut's films. He had become an activist against Fidel Castro then. He was showing his film. So we got talking. I said, I'm doing a political thriller. He said, oh, I'm doing a documentary, and my own documentary he had directed. So he asked me who was a cameraman. I said, Subrata Mitra. He says, of Satyajit Ray fame? He said, yes. He just embraced me. And he said, you know, I studied my black and white photography in Cinémathèque Paris, watching Subrata's filmmaking talent and his lighting. Then he took out his card and he wrote in the card to a maestro from a grateful student, Nestor. And he says, when you go back, please give it to me.
Oh, that's...
You know, that is the quality of work that Subrata Mitra had. You know, and believe me, I don't think he was a cameraman's cameraman. Even to this day, you talk to any cameraman, from Santosh Sivan to, you know, all the great names, Govind Nyalani and all of them say that perhaps the greatest cameraman India has produced, and even V.K. Murthy, you know, all of them, you name them all, is Subrata. And this was one of the reasons where I think Ray actually, after Charulata, after Nayak, the look of his camera, his films, diminished slightly.
Okay. That's
because Subrata was not there. Because Ray was a man who believed in entire control. He wanted to do music, he wanted to do, he was a Renaissance man. But camera work is something quite different. And Ray didn't understand, and he took one of Subrata's assistants to do it. And you could make out, there's a world of a difference when you see, you know, film like Charulata, and you see what the other films of Ray. You know, in terms of texture, in terms of shades, in terms of the fluidity of the camera movement. You know,
Nayak, of course, you can't make out that that it's not a train. It's a, absolutely the way it's done.
And that was his last film with Ray. And then the other thing is also with Subrata is that when he was working with, I mean, remember when he was working with Ray, he was in his 20s. 21 is when he began Pather Panchali. You know, and then he made that film, the Apur trilogy. Not Apur Sansar, the one before Aparajita, which was shot in Banaras. Okay? He had to simulate lighting. And what did he do? He took dhoti and bounced light so that there could be simulation of daylight inside a Banaras house. Simultaneously, that bounced light was done by Sven Nykvist in Sweden for Ingmar Bergman. And if you go to the AFI, the American Film Institute, both of them have been given credit for it. One using sophisticated equipment, one using a dhoti.
Oh my God.
And that was the greatness of Subrata Mitra, that he was creating a sense. Now, today, bounce light is taken for granted. Everybody uses tissue, everybody uses that, it's a given. And now our lighting has become so sort of sophisticated in terms of the new kind of lights that you have and, with the temperature control and everything. But those days, you had to balance light from outside and inside for color. You had to get the right kind of, filters. All of that had to be bought, put in the, windows. Subrata was absolutely masterful in that,
You have recently, and as we wind this up, you've recently announced a sequel to the film, if I'm not mistaken. You haven't directed, you worked on a number of films and documentaries in the interim, but you've not attempted a feature film after this. Why, and what is it that prompts you to make a sequel to New Delhi?
Well, I think the answer was in your first question.
Okay.
That I feel that New Delhi Times still remains so relevant today that a sequel to it would be equally relevant, number one. And number two, things have changed so much that sometimes you feel the need to say something, expression. I mean, for me, cinema is not just about entertainment. I mean, it has to have that entertainment quality by being compelling enough for a viewer to watch. But it also needs to say something beyond it. I'm not saying as a messenger. I'm not saying as giving a lecture, but purely in terms of making people think. And I've made films like that. I made, for instance, my film for which I was nominated for the Emmy Awards, journalist in the jihadi murder of Daniel Pearl. There also, I explored this whole thing between two ways of looking at the world. One from an idealistic journalist, that was Daniel Pearl, and one from a very idealistic young man who studied in London School of Economics and then becomes a jihadist. So in many ways, a lot of my films
have engaged with
what is happening around the world. And in this particular film that we're trying, the moment the script is being written with Khalid Mohammed and myself, we want to do that. I'm hoping I'll get the budget. I hope I get the right actors. And it's too early just now. But that is the motivation.
And though you say things have remained the same in many ways,
No, it's become worse.
It's become worse, in fact.
And that's why I feel the need to, that it needs a sequel.
And the whole world of media has turned upside down.
No, media world there is no media world today, other than a few newspapers, broadsheet, and one or two online channels.
You can't recall the name of an editor of a newspaper anymore like you used to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you intend that's one of the things that I think your film will try and address.
I will. I mean, I'm hoping that I will try to bring in idealism without, compromising on the reality of the situation.
And one final question. A lot of, even recently when you announced and when social media was buzzing with this sequel, the news of the sequel, I have seen tweets I have heard a lot about New Delhi Times. Where do I get to watch the film? Where do we get to?
That is the problem. You see, the thing is that I was only the director. Producer was P.K. Tiwari. He didn't keep the negatives properly. I'm 100% sure the negatives are in a bad shape. So it's being restored now. I was told by him, that he's trying to restore the negative. If he can restore the negative, then most probably he'll sell it to one of the OTT platforms. Hopefully,
but that's in the works now.
It's in the works. That's what he told me. So
Thank you so much. On that hopeful note, I really hope many of us get to watch what is probably one of the finest political thrillers made at a time when political thrillers were not common fare, and it was made with a lot of conviction and gumption. On that hopeful note, thank you, Mr. Sharma. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you very much.